Hello, Pittsburgh. This is TribLive's From the Newsroom, a podcast bringing you top stories from TribLive.com. News outlets across the world this weekend have covered the events that befell former President Donald Trump at his campaign rally on Saturday, July 13th, where a 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks shot at the Republican Party's presumptive nominee and hit him in the upper right ear. As he fired, Crooks killed a member of the audience and critically injured two others. I'm Zach Gibson, and today I'm sitting down with TribLive photographer Shane Dunlap, who experienced the ordeal in Butler County firsthand. Hi, Shane. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Zach. Thanks.
Talk to me about your experience in Butler overall.
Well, the day started out pretty much like most political rallies I've covered, and I've been covering political rallies for about 16 or 17 years now. Probably at the end of the George Bush presidency was when I was just breaking into journalism, so I've been doing these kind of events for quite a few years now, and this was a massive event. There were thousands and thousands of people there, and it was difficult to navigate through initially, but getting there and dealing with the traffic, parking, getting my equipment together at my car, passing through the security checkpoints, and then having to navigate the crowd shoulder to shoulder with a ton of very heavy photography equipment was a challenge. I had to jump over a fence at one point just to get into the what I usually refer to as the media pen, but really it's just a fenced-off area where they corral the credentialed media to cover the event.
Okay. So before we get too into it, I want you to tell me what preparing for a photo assignment is typically like for you, specifically when you're covering bigger news like this.
It is a little different than my normal day-to-day general assignments. I have to bring more lenses with me, more camera gear than I normally would. Really heavy stuff. Typically, it's not. It makes the chiropractor bills very high. But because of the strict security and the strict roles for the media there, I'm not really allowed to get very close or move around a lot. I'm sort of stuck in that media pen.
Right.
And I'm pretty far away from the podium, couple hundred feet maybe. So I needed a bigger, heavier lens, the type that you would normally see photographers using maybe on the sidelines of a Steelers game, which I don't normally use that kind of lens. For day-to-day assignments, it's not really necessary, but for large events like this, that's something that you got to prepare for.
Right. So what do you look for when you get to an event like this? What are you trying to cover? What are you trying to shoot for?
Yeah, that's a great question. The key really is to get to these events and kind of get your bearings situated first. See where everything is happening, where everything could be happening. And then your main goal is to try to make photos that are interesting and different and compelling in a way that isn't just your standard news photograph. In other words, what you're looking for is storytelling pictures, and that may happen on the sidelines, that may happen with members of the crowd. You're always looking for the most storytelling photos that you can find. Easier said than done in most cases.
Let's talk about this event. What was it like? What was the security like in entering the actual facility, the area where the rally was going to be taking place?
Very strict. Exactly what I would have expected, exactly what I've seen in the past from Secret Service and other law enforcement that were working the area in that venue. There was a pretty wide security perimeter for the venue because they were anticipating tens of thousands of people. But going through security, you get wanded, you go through a metal detector. Media has to go through a separate security checkpoint where dogs will sniff our bags, Secret Service open and looking in the contents of your bag and make sure that everything is hunky-dory. And that usually happens pretty quickly. They're trying to get a lot of people through fast. And they checked my bags, and once they gave me the thumbs up, I was in.
So after you passed the security checkpoints, you went to what you call the media pen. What was it like in there?
Crowded. You have dozens and dozens of professional media from all over. Some from local Pennsylvania, many from national media outlets across the country, and even some from international media outlets from Europe and Japan. You're constantly looking for a spot where you're not blocking anybody else, and you want to be as courteous as possible. And everyone always is at these events normally. Everyone likes to talk to each other and help each other out. It was normally what I would have expected. It was hot and sunny, and we didn't have a lot of shade, and we were waiting for quite a few hours. Other than that, it was a normal, I would say, a political rally event that I've seen before, especially with former President Trump. With many of his supporters leaned up right against the fence at the media pen. So we were very close to the crowd, to be honest, right in the middle of it.
Okay. So now you're set up in the media pen. A large, energetic crowd is everywhere as the presidential nominee is about to take the stage. Tell us about the actual incident and how you experienced it.
Well, Trump began his speech around 6 p.m. and he started speaking. I was below the riser, which is an elevated platform for the television cameras to get their shots from. I was standing below them, trying to stay out of their shots and also trying to get the photographs I was looking for. And it was about less than 10 minutes into his speech when I decided to turn the camera around and photograph some of the crowds, which is normally something I would do at these events, just to show folks, what some of the supporters are there, if they're cheering, if they're excited. When I was doing that, I wasn't looking at the podium where Trump was. At that point, I was looking through my camera at the crowd, and that's when I heard the crack of gunshots go off, which is an unmistakable sound. I knew right away that gunshots were being fired, and at that moment, most everyone in front of me, the crowd of hundreds of people, and many of the journalists that were standing next to me, ducked and took cover as best as they could. There was no way to tell where those shots were coming from. Many people thought that they were coming from inside the crowd initially. It was a very scary thing. I ducked for a second myself, but quickly realizing that the shots probably weren't coming in that direction, I got the camera back up on the podium just in time to see Trump fall behind the podium and the security detail jump on top of him. And from there, this entire event probably unfolded over the course of less than a minute and a half. So it happened extremely quickly. Trump was pulled back up, as many of you have seen by now, and his face was bloodied from his ear being hit. And the Secret Service were trying to get him off the stage, but before that, he managed to gesture toward the crowd with a raised fist, and then they quickly removed him. And from there, it turned into an emergency situation. It was no longer a peaceful event.
With all of the shock and chaotic energy happening, what was going through your mind as these events unfolded?
There's not a lot of time to process what's happening in the middle of this. As a working photographer, photojournalist, you always are reacting in the moment. That's mainly what your job is. And so in that exact moment, my focus was on my job, which is to get pictures as fast as possible to the newsroom and get very legible, clear, readable photos that are in focus and publishable. That was where my focus was for quite a few minutes afterwards. When the shooting stopped and everyone realized quickly what had happened, everyone inside the pen, all the working journalists, immediately went into journalist mode. Just in a kind of a crazy thing to witness. Everyone is focused on their job, whether that's writing, talking to people who may have seen something, sending pictures, sending video. Everyone just gets hyper focused on their job. So I'm no different than any of those other professional journalists. I'm trying to do my job as quickly and as best as possible.
Okay. So in your account, you talk about your coworker also being at this event. What was your interaction with Ryan Dito like?
Yeah, I wasn't exactly sure where he was while I was photographing Trump's speech. And when I saw that Trump had been shot, I immediately ran back to my computer to transmit photos. And that's when I saw Ryan. And at that moment, I don't think Ryan knew exactly what had happened. I don't think many people did. But I was pretty certain that he had been shot. And I yelled at Ryan, they shot him, and his reaction was pretty much what you'd expect. Ryan's a great reporter, and he's been covering politics a long time, and he got to work right away, talking to people, doing his job, and I didn't really see him after that because we worked very closely together, but we both have very different jobs, so we both kind of focus on our own parts of the process. And I later spoke with him on the phone after we left the venue. We were, everyone was forced to leave the venue, and he was okay, and everybody was okay, and that was good.
Absolutely. So, as you just said, there were law enforcement had started to forcefully evacuate the crowds. Can you tell me what that looked like after the president was cleared and evacuated?
Yeah, the Secret Service did not hesitate for a second to make sure that everyone was out of that venue as fast as possible. There's always a few stragglers that they have to kind of forcibly remove, but I would say that law enforcement and the Secret Service personnel managed to get a crowd of tens of thousands of people evacuated from that venue in a matter of 5 minutes. It was absolutely a crazy thing to witness. But I think most of the crowd and everyone realized that moment that it was probably time to leave anyway. So, the law enforcement were very forceful. They were telling people to get out right away. And that's what we did. A few members of the media stayed back as long as we could. I tried to stay as long as I could so I could capture a few more photos of the reaction from the Trump supporters and the reaction from the crowd and the law enforcement working at the scene, which had now become basically an active crime scene. So I didn't have a lot of time. They definitely came up to me and told me to get out of there, and at which point I complied, of course, and went back to my car. After that point, pretty much all of the law enforcement within the 50-mile radius were on their way to that event, and it was locked down pretty tight.
Mm-hmm. You also say in your account that the cell service went dead.
Yeah, we were having some issues with signals before the shooting had happened, and I'm not sure why, if that was just where we were located in Butler County, if the signal was just bad, but it was when breaking news happens like this and you are photographing it and you know that you have a very, very short time limit to get the images transmitted. The last thing that you want to have happen is your mobile signal to go out. And I wasn't the only one. It was everyone, my colleagues next to me, and it was stressful to have that happen, to say the least. But eventually we managed to get signals and get photos transmitted from our cars back in the parking lots. It was just not as quickly as we would have liked, but there were many, many images from that event and video as well. So I would say it was well documented.
Okay. So in this time between the actual shots being heard and you being evacuated from the venue, as you said, you've hyper-focused and tried to get as many detailed, clear shots as you could. And I know that there have been many images going around showing the president and his fist just showing after he was injured before he was moved off the stage. Can you describe for us some of the photos that you took of the scene of the former president and the crowd?
Yeah, the photographs were, well, like I was said earlier, I was quite a distance away from where the stage was. So the photos I took were with a telephoto lens, and they sometimes can be lacking in context because it's a very narrow field of view in those kind of pictures. The kinds of pictures I could get of the president were very much of that nature. And, he was only on stage for a matter of a minute or less before the Secret Service got him off there. So by the time I had realized that it was relatively safe to continue taking photos, and I was watching the stage through the camera, when they pulled him up, I could see that his face was clearly bloodied, and it was pretty obvious to me that he had been shot at that point. Though it was him raising his fist and making that gesture was also a signal to us that he was alive, at the very least. So we knew that much right away, at least from that. And the other photos that I made after that were pretty limited, honestly. I didn't have a lot of time, so there were a lot of reactions from the crowd of supporters. Many people were crying, praying, hugging each other. Many people were unsure what exactly happened. Many people were asking me and others, what happened. So there was a lot to navigate, but I tried to make as many peripheral photos as I would have liked to make, showing the scene around and how people were reacting. And that was about the extent of what I was capable of before I had to leave.
Before we close out, I'll have you just one more time highlight what your emotions were like while experiencing all of this and trying to maintain composure to achieve the job that we were there to do.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Zach. A lot of people have asked me that, and that's not really something that you can pre-plan for.
Right.
None of these events, and I've been covering breaking news for many years, it always occurs like this, and you least expect it to. When you react to these situations, there's not a lot of processing, not a lot of thinking. You are being fueled mainly by adrenaline and focused on doing your job. It's not until much later, hours later, when things have calmed down, that you start to think about what happened, and then you may be flooded with emotions at that point. Not during these events, though. During these events, I would say emotions are maybe limited or even stifled because you're so focused. But as things cool down, as the climax of the event wanes, that's when you start realizing what has just exactly happened. There was an assassination attempt on the president, and that sinks in with you at a later point when you realize what you just witnessed.
Okay. Well, Shane, thank you for your composure and diligence in covering that event, and thank you for joining me today to talk about it.
Thanks, Zach. I really appreciate it, and great work on the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining. If you enjoyed this week's episode, share the podcast to help keep Western PA locally informed with insightful discussion and the latest news from your area. It's an easy way to spread the word, and it helps our podcast reach more people like you. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify and turn on episode notifications so you never miss new content. Once again, I'm Zach Gibson, and this is From the Newsroom.